Artificial intelligence has invaded our society. Some folks love it, others despise it. Many believe that AI should be subject to strict government regulations, but would this threaten our privacy, autonomy, and free speech? Or could it protect us from AI taking over, ensuring that maybe certain jobs need to be kept by humans? Well, today we speak with a lawyer who is more on the former side of that argument. Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has come out with a new report called The Danger of Government-Controlled Artificial Intelligence. And joining us from Calgary to discuss it is John Carpay, president of the JCFF. John, thanks so much for joining us today.
So glad to be with you and your viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I know obviously you're you're more with the justice sort of constitutional law, and you're looking more at freedom of speech. But is there a time when government regulation maybe does need to be a little bit in control of AI just to make sure it doesn't take over our lives, or maybe even ensuring certain companies maybe retain a certain amount of human employees?
I'm not sure about how it would apply to the job front. It's not something I've looked into. But in terms of privacy, it's very important that we not be subjected to the surveillance state. Mm-hmm. And the reason is privacy has an inherent value. You know, we don't want our next door neighbor or even our closest friends to know everything about us. We kind of want to have a sphere of, this is my business, this is my core identity, and I disclose things about myself to others. That's my choice and my discretion. And so there's a risk with the very tragic Tumbler Ridge shootings back in February.
Yeah, I was going to mention, ever since that mass shooting, there have been a lot of concerns about AI, haven't there been, and its impact on public safety. So it looks like the shooter had an AI account that was actually flagged by the company, but it wasn't reported to the police. And now parents of the victims are suing the company for possibly billions. So is there a legitimate place for government regulations on AI companies to keep the public safe? What do you think?
Well, with the Tumbler Ridge tragedy, the shooter's viewing of AI and doing some queries about mass shootings, that actually took place 8 months prior to the shooting.
Yeah.
What happened more recently was that the police had taken away this person's guns in 2024 and actually returned the firearms to the shooter 1 month before the shooting. So I don't know if the parents are also shooting the police. But the problem is that there's just no guarantee that if we had a surveillance state, would crime actually go down? There's no guarantee of that because things like these mass shootings are societal, cultural issues where we have widespread loneliness, we have mental illness, we have declining mental health. And I don't see enough politicians talking about those societal and cultural issues.
I guess that's true. There are calls for AI to be nationalized with strict government control. So is the government of Canada considering this?
Yes, even prior to the shooting, they have been talking about nationalizing AI or placing controls over it. And if that were to happen, then your use of AI would no longer be, you would start self-centering. You wouldn't freely type in whatever you felt like if you knew that the state was watching and listening. And so it would lead to a lot of self-censorship amongst Canadians if they moved ahead.
Okay, so, here's a question. If Canada would have had a nationalized artificial intelligence regulation in place at the time of those shootings in Tumbler Ridge there, how effective do you think it would have been?
Likely, well, it's speculative, but likely wouldn't have made a difference. When you consider the 8-month time lag between the shooting and when the shooter got kicked off of AI, that was 8 months. And when you consider the police returning weapons to the shooter, and then more significantly, this person was mentally ill. There was family breakdown, there was divorce, it was a fatherless home. We've got a loss of respect for human life that has been you can see that in recent decades. 50 years ago, the rates of firearms ownership were much, much higher, and there were no mass shootings. So there's a cultural decline, and there's a loss of respect for human life that is part of this cultural rot. And I think that's where we need to focus on.
Yeah, I guess, but if somebody's putting into their chat GPT how to shoot up a school or what's the best way to go about murdering as many people as you, I don't think these are things that average people put into their, Google searches or chat GPT. You don't think that should be flagged?
But then why not monitor everybody's internet usage? Because 2 or 3 years ago, when the artificial intelligence was less prevalent, you could have people doing a Google search that was not artificial intelligence, but you could Google search mass shootings, or you could ask Google what's the most effective way to kill a large number of people in a short time, and you would have had Google giving you information. And the quality of that might have been inferior to AI, but do we want the surveillance state where Big Brother is watching our every move?
So what abilities would a nationalized AI program or what have you, what would that give to whatever government was in power at that time?
Well, depending on how the law was crafted, we have to remember as well that governments are made up out of people. People have human nature that is a mix of good and evil, and every person is capable of doing really good things and also causing much harm and damage. Governments are like people, but on a larger scale. And do we want, the question I would ask is do Canadians want government to have this surveillance power where the police or other government authorities can watch and monitor what we do and say? I suggest it's a horrible nightmare, and the state will abuse its power, and we will we'll become like communist China, where the government has has ongoing very tight tabs on every citizen, what they do, where they go, what they think, etc.
Right, and I believe you and I have talked about this before, those examples out of China where they do social credit scores with loss of privileges to those with those lower social credit scores.
In China, they would probably give you demerit points for inappropriate internet searches. And once the state has that power, why would they limit it only to watching for mass shooters or for people doing queries about mass shootings? Once the state has that power, they can flag political conversations that they don't like, where somebody says, I hate the surveillance state, I think we should dismantle it and elect a bunch of politicians who are going to restore our privacy rights, dismantle the surveillance state. That's a query that can get flagged by the authorities once the surveillance state is in place.
Right. Bill C-22 ties in with this as well, doesn't it? The Lawful Access Act, so where police would have access to digital evidence. So does this give the government and the police access to private online conversations and online data, potentially without a warrant?
Not directly, but it's kind of a building block that makes that possible in the future. For example, Bill C-22 requires private companies to keep the data on everybody's emails and texts and phone calls as to when the phone call was made and to whom and where the person was when making it. And Bill C-22 would require telecom companies to keep that information on file for a full year. So it doesn't directly give government access to it, but it's kind of like setting it up for future widespread access. Bill C-22 also makes it easier for police to get a warrant to do searches and to get access to this personal information.
I think you alluded to this one a little bit earlier, but your report, John, touches on the likelihood of overregulation leading to AI users falling into this self-censorship out of fear of government eyes looking over their shoulders. So could you explain that a little bit to us?
Well, Bill C-22 it's a building block of the surveillance state. It also allows the federal government to order private companies to set up their software in a way so as to make it easy for governments to conduct searches. So if Bill C-22 passes into law, we won't notice a difference the following day, the following week, the following month, maybe not even the following year. We won't notice any difference. But this is putting in place a block of the surveillance state. There are people that want it. This is not new, by the way. In the 1970s, I remember people saying, well, some people, not a lot of people, but if only police could listen in on every telephone conversation, we could catch all kinds of criminals, right? So this is kind of a very old idea that we should have a surveillance state to reduce crime, but the cure is worse than the disease.
And would that state surveillance inevitably lead to political and ideological bias and content moderation? You were kind of talking about that earlier. If somebody's talking against the government, I'm guessing like these users could be flagged if they're critical of the government or if their viewpoints on social issues don't quite align with the government's view.
Well, that's it exactly. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. To give the government, again, which is made up of people, so at the end of the day, it's individual police officers, individual CSIS agents, individual bureaucrats. If you give people this power to listen in on people's internet searches, it's pretty similar to installing video cameras and sound recording devices in people's living rooms. And I think it's naive. You have to have a very naive perspective on human nature, see human nature as being 100% good in order to go along with that. Because people who have that power, human nature being flawed, they will abuse that power. It's bound to happen.
Well, I mean, we hear about things like this happening already, like if somebody has an Alexa in their house, that Alexa's listening, or even phones. They say that if your phone is on, it can hear everything that you're doing. I don't know how true that is.
Well, anecdotally, if you're with a buddy and you're talking about the Edmonton Oilers over and over and over again for an hour long, and then the next time you turn on your internet, you see these ads for, you can buy a Edmonton Oilers jersey or baseball cap or whatever.
Yeah.
So
coincidence?
There's probably some truth
or
to
not.
it.
I know it's happened to me as well. And sometimes it's not even an hour-long conversation. It's just you bring up something and suddenly there's an ad there and you're like, oh, that's spooky. So, John, undoubtedly, the government will place some kind of regulations around artificial intelligence, AI. So any thoughts on what kind of limits or government oversight would be reasonable?
Okay. The criminal code already makes it illegal to conspire to commit a crime. So if there's people that are plotting a crime, involved in terrorism, planning to blow up the Parliament buildings, running a prostitution ring, creating or selling child pornography, if there's any criminal activity, that's already illegal, right? Whether it's online or offline. Sending an email to somebody about planning a terrorist act is just as criminal as an in-person oral conversation. So what police currently have already is they have the power to get a search warrant, and if they suspect that somebody has committed a crime or is currently committing a crime or will commit a crime, the authorities can go to court, they can get a warrant, and police can listen in on the emails, chats, phone calls, Google searches. They can do surveillance on an individual, and that's the way it should be. But it should be one individual or one group of people or one gang. It shouldn't be the entire population. So we've struck the right balance in over the course of centuries, where police can violate our property rights, our privacy rights. They can engage in surveillance, but it's of a person or a gang, and they need court approval. And we need to stick with that model.
Yeah, and it's warranted surveillance. Yeah, thanks so much for your time today, John. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, but appreciate having you on for this.
Thanks for having me on your show.
John Carpay is the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.